Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness. Desmond Tutu. And when there is light, there are colors. So as you see, I'm holding a book, and today we are going to share our thoughts on this book of Hope and Colors by Amal Ashraf. Amal was my student at Devagiri CMI Public School from 2005 to 2013. She always struck me as intelligent, curious, and reflective. Amal, how are you, and what have you been up to since you left school?
Hello, ma'am. I've been really good. Thank you very much for asking. Since school, I moved on to the Indian Institute of Management in Indore, where I went on to pursue a BA and MBA course. It's called the Integrated Program in Management. After that, I've been working for a good 4 years. I've been working in a few firms. I've a lot of exposure in sales, marketing, consulting, etc. It's been a very interesting ride, and I'm really thankful for what life has brought to me.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. So before we jump into the book, I have one question to ask you. Why do you write?
That's actually a very interesting question because I've come across quite a few fellow writers who have different answers to this. It gets really subjective. The reason why I write is because it gives me some structure to my thought. It actually helps aid the reflection process in terms of what life has brought to me and the experiences that I undergo. So it really helps me analyze a lot of things. It helps me reflect on them and also finally conclude something about myself or about others, which then helps me move on in life. So writing really brings me peace. It's also a reflective activity that fulfills my soul to some extent. And that's the reason why I write. I know that you write as well. Why don't you tell me, why do you write?
Well, I write mainly because I want to see my thoughts on paper. Because most of the time when we think, no, we think a lot of things and we cannot really grasp everything. And you don't know which one is really important. So I write because I want to see what I am thinking. And then the second part is I want to express myself. So really there are things in life, that when we want to express, we cannot just simply say them, but then you have to write them first. So I write because I want to see myself on paper and then to express myself. That's it. And I have noticed, no, I have read your book, and I have noticed that this is really a very interesting book, because you spoke mainly about yourself and you have become very, very vulnerable in this. So the first entry you have here is acceptance. Okay, that's a very difficult thing to do. So can you please explain or at least describe what this means to you?
Sure. So the whole process of writing the book, it was a little tedious in the sense it did go through a lot of edits. However, I wanted to maintain the authenticity, which is why I kept it as raw and vulnerable as you said. Now, going into the first entry, which is acceptance, what I've tried to explore in terms of the words that have been used, the phrases that I've used, is about the journey that every young person goes through when they move away from a familiar set of circumstances. You're brought up in a home, you have your parents, you have your siblings, a close circle of friends, the school that you go to, the locality. All of these are really familiar to you, and you have a sense of stability in life. However, when you move away from home, let's say, for example, what happened with me was for college, I had to go to a completely different state, a whole entire different set of circumstances, right? And you begin to try to figure out which parts of your identity do you carry on, what stays behind. And one thing that was really interesting for me when I moved to college, something that I find is also very reflective in Jhumpa Lahiri's book, The Namesake, is that when you move to something unfamiliar, you cling on to what was familiar to you in a almost desperate attempt to cling on to that identity that you think that you are. And that was an interesting process in college. And I went there, I came across a lot of different people who I have had a good fortune of meeting, and then also went on to call them my friends. There were a lot of different kinds of food, a lot of different traditions, all that I was exposed to. And one consequence of that is that I began questioning a lot of things that I thought were inherent beliefs in me. And I realized quite a few of them can actually be questioned and to some extent negated. So what I'm trying to do with acceptance is trying to outline the journey of questioning what you think is so inherent to you and realizing that some of them might even be wrong. And then the journey back to the place where you've originated from, and realizing how things remain the same, however you view them differently. You are the changed person. So that's kind of the journey that I've tried to capture in acceptance.
Okay, you just reminded me of one particular book. Actually, Joseph Campbell. He said he wrote the hero's journey. Okay, that everyone is a hero, and then you set out, on a journey, and then in that journey you change, and then you come back and you're different. So everyone actually experiences that. Okay, so let's connect it to your coral. Okay, somehow, as you know, that when we are plunged into a different situation, you are always in the state of asking yourself whether which one is right, which one is wrong. So I have seen that Coral spoke about choices, about right and wrong. And this is actually part of our journey in life, really to distinguish which is which. So please tell us more about this one.
Sure. So Coral is about being put into situations where you have to decide which path are you going to take. And it's about the journey in which you're trying to analyze, go through the pros and cons of every single option in front of you, trying to make the best choice that you can, and finally having to make that choice and then live with the consequences. So what I've tried to do with Coral is try to emphasize on the fact that we as human beings tend to focus on the negative consequences a little more. We've all made choices in our lives that have gone on to define our lives at one point or the other. A few of them may have been positive choices. We choose to reflect on them lesser. However, one thing I've realized is if something goes a little on the negative side, we tend to overthink a lot. We tend to analyze it. We try to even correct it mentally. So with Coral, what I'm talking about is talking to your younger self and forgiving your younger self for having made that choice because it didn't know any better. At that point in time, that's all that you know. So Coral is more of, in hindsight, everything makes sense. But at that point in time, that's all that you know. So forgive yourself and move on. That's the kind of message I was trying to convey.
Yeah, okay, good. Because forgive yourself and move on. But you also mentioned in gray, because when we make choices, it's either right or wrong. Okay, but life is not all about right and wrong. We know that very well. Life is also about, not only about black and white, okay, dark and light and all, but it's really mostly gray area. And here you really struck a chord in the gray area. Most of the time we're all stuck in the gray area and we don't know what to do. So what do you say about this part? We can share it.
So the thing with gray, what I realized a little later on in life is that there is no good and bad. It's always good or bad. That's the kind of realization I had quite a little later than I would have wanted. However, one thing about the duality of good and bad is that you realize that what might be right for you might not be right for the others. And with Gray, I'm trying to explore that uncharted territory. I'm trying to come in terms of the fact that there is no duality in nature. It's more of a spectrum along which you decide which is the side you want to align yourselves with. I think somewhere along it, I also quote that good and bad is just a white to black spectrum in which there are shades of gray, and you choose which shade of gray do you want to align yourself to. So that's kind of the message that I'm trying to convey with Gray.
Okay, so you have written about all types of colors here, so that's why it's actually of hope and colors. But as I have read through it, you are very strong when it comes to your experience of who you are. And there is a particular poem here about identity. Okay, so can you tell us about that?
Sure. So identity came across when I realized that a lot of new people that you meet, the first questions that you're normally asked is, what's your name, where do you work, what is your designation, etc. That normally happens later on when you start working. However, as a student also, you're asked, which school do you go to, and maybe to some extent even possibly marks. And what I'm trying to convey through identity is that there are other facets to you as an individual that are just as important or maybe more important. There are the books that you read, the music that you listen to. All of these are equally important. Just because you're not being questioned on these when you meet somebody doesn't mean that it's less important to you as a person. As an individual, to some extent, art might be one of the most important things that you have to develop as a part of your personality, because it helps you express yourself, like you mentioned earlier. It's really important because whatever stimuli you get from the external environment, it's being processed internally, and you are being able to express it in a way that's more processed and refined according to the thought processes. So I find that really interesting, and that's basically what I'm trying to show through identity. There's also a question on do you have a core, or does it constantly evolve? Do you evolve as a person throughout life? I think the answer to that would be yes, based on my experience so far. However, there is a core to you that I think remains constant. The values and the principles that drive you, so far I've seen that it remains constant through childhood, through teenage stage of life, as well as young adulthood. So that these are the questions I'm asking. I offer no answers. However, these are questions that I think would be interesting to think about.
Yeah, it's very interesting because the question whether we are, in essence, really stable. There is something in us that's really doesn't change. So we try to search for that core, and you actually have verbalized it, like it's values, something that's deep within you, right? But there are things also, that change, in us. Okay, I remember Alice in Wonderland. Okay, so when the caterpillar asked Alice, "Who are you?" and Alice answered, "I hardly know, sir, just at present, because when I got up in the morning, I have changed a lot since then." So it's really different. No, we are not the same, now. I mean, when you woke up in the morning, you'd be this person. But after a few hours, based on the experiences you have gone through, okay, I'm so sure you're not the same. So it's really interesting to think about that. But as we said, there's something deep within us that never changes. And I believe it's our essence. I think it's our goodness. It's our mark, in life that makes us very different from other people. Otherwise, we're like just, a piece of clay all the time that people can just change or experience can change. But I believe that there is a certain, core that never changes. And I believe it's also divine in nature. So that's the thing. Okay, so speaking about identity and speaking about core and changes, let me just ask you, you're very young, okay, so what do you really want to become? So how do you see yourself in the future? How do you want to mold yourself? Okay.
This is a question that requires a lot of thought, and I'm yet to actually come across a definitive answer. However, the general direction I would like to lead my life into is to explore more avenues and seek out things that give me some kind of fulfillment, some kind of happiness. For example, writing was something that really fulfilled me, and I was able to come up with something solid out of it. So there are other avenues I'd like to explore. I'd like to free myself in terms of expectations and just let myself explore what the world has to offer. The world is my oyster. That's the kind of approach I have as of now. And yes, let's see where it takes us.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? Okay, so there's one more question I want to ask you. What is your hopeful advice to yourself at the moment? We always ask questions like, what is your advice to the young readers? What is your advice to the young writers? No, I'll ask you a different question. What is your hopeful advice to yourself at the moment?
One thing I realized is to stop having inhibitions. When I went forward and this book was published, the kind of support I've had has been overwhelming in terms of the people who have come forward, the feedback I've received. So it helps me understand that I shouldn't inhibit myself so much, and there are other things. So like I said, I feel a little more confident going out and exploring other avenues, just because of the fact that there is so much positive support when I try to do something different, and I would like to take that in my stead.
Thank you very much. So actually, this is a milestone in your life, right? I knew you back then. You loved to write, and I'm so sure this is a dream come true. And we all hope that you can have more books to come. Okay. So the last words for you and for the people who are listening. a quote by Robert Schuller. He said, "Let your hopes, not your hurts, shape your future." So not just hope, colorful hopes. So thank you very much, Amal. It has been a long time since we have, met each other, okay, been together. So I'm happy that we came together in this kind of environment. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.